Hi, and welcome to the Punk CX podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm an advisor, best-selling author, speaker, and general explorer when it comes to customer and employee experience. I'm really interested in figuring out what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees. So with that in mind, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, authors and academics to uncover some clues about what it takes to build such an organization. Now, some of you may know the podcast as the Rare Business Podcast, but I decided to rename and rebrand the podcast recently. This is for a number of reasons. First one was to mirror the title of my book, Punk CX, which was published in June 2019. 2, because I'm a fan of punk music. And 3, it's just more fun, right? Anyway, if this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then hello and welcome. And please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsko.com, as I've now completed over 300 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then welcome back and thank you. Anyway, that's enough from me right now. Let's get into the interview.
Before we do that, I'd like to say a big thank you to the folks at Amplexor for sponsoring my podcast for the coming month. Amplexor is preparing to launch a really exciting virtual series called Ignite Revenue Through Content, which will feature leading speakers and thinkers in short, punchy, and thought-provoking bi-monthly episodes, exploring and highlighting insights and best practices of how to leverage content as a strategic differentiator. It'll run from August through mid-December, and kicking it off on August the 20th will be yours truly, talking about unleashing your inner punk, a rebellious take on customer engagement. I think the session that we've organised will be awesome. In fact, it's a real honour to be asked to do it, and I'm really looking forward to it. So go to amplexor.com and search for Ignite Revenue Through Content. To find out more, register for free, and to check out the full agenda. Go register today, and I hope to see you there. Anyway, that's all I have to say about that. Let's get back into the interview.
So welcome to the next edition of the Punk CX podcast. With me today, I have Rachel Neaman, who is a leadership mentor, a coach, an advisor, and also a non-executive director. Hi, Rachel. How are you doing?
Hi, Adrian. Doing fine, thank you. Very nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome, and it's really nice to have you on the podcast. Now, Rachel, for the benefit of our listeners and kind of readers, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and also about the work that you do?
Sure. I guess one way of putting the work I do is that I'm interested in using digital transformation to deliver the very best outcomes for organizations and for customers. Cool. So my background is very much in digital leadership and digital transformation, and primarily in the public and not-for-profit sectors. I was the first chief digital officer at the Department of Health when digital by default government services became a thing, and when that whole program of work was introduced, which was a very exciting time and very pioneering in the concept of digital as a discipline in its own right. Mm-hmm. And I've maintained strong links with health tech ever since. I've also been the CEO of a couple of organizations, one looking at how to ensure everyone has a basic level of digital skills because of the digital environment and digital world we're all living in. And the second looking more at what are those sort of lifelong skills that people need in order to adapt to the constant pace of change that we're seeing around us. So again, our digital world is constantly transforming, and how do we, as citizens, as customers, as businesses, as decision makers, how do we keep pace with that? Perfect. Now I'm doing more of a portfolio career, so I do management consultancy and board advisory work. I do a lot of mentoring and coaching. I'm a non-executive director for a SaaS PLC, for an academic organization, a health organization, and a digital organization. And I do a certain amount of public speaking and judging digital awards and other activities of that sort. So a very eclectic mix, but a very balanced mix, and digital transformation and leadership is very much the theme.
Brilliant. And blimey, that's a long list. So congratulations for fitting it all in. What can I tell you?
Thank
You're
you.
smashing it. And now that you talk about kind of digital, and you talk about transformation, and you talk about health and tech, and also public sector as well. And that was one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on the podcast, just to sort of explore some of these things. I also wanted to say a big shout out to Rick Piper, an old contact of mine who introduced us. Thank you, Rick.
Absolutely, I agree.
Big hat tip to Rick. So all those things, I mean, so digital, health, tech, not-for-profit, government, transformation, leadership, etc. Those are this really interesting mix. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast, because I wanted to ask you about, this is a reflective exercise, about what you've seen over the last few months, because we've seen organizations go through some massive changes as a result of this pandemic. And I just wanted to get your take, having looked at it from your perspective, of what has stood out for you, and so what are some of the big lessons and takeaways?
Well, as you say, we've seen an enormous change in the way people work and socialise and conduct their leisure activities. And this has really led to a huge spike in digital adoption. So over the past few months, we've seen a greater increase in digital adoption than we have over the past few years. It's really quite extraordinary. And whether that's in healthcare, whether that's in business, whether that's, as I said, simply in the way people conduct their private lives, it's a massive change. And with that has come challenges of its own, in terms of people needing to understand things like privacy.
Yes.
And cybersecurity and those sorts of issues. If for those who are in work, remote working and remote leadership for leaders has actually been a very difficult thing for many people to adapt to. How do you maintain a sense of team, a sense of morale, a sense of connection when you're all working separately at home? So I think the need for leaders to adapt, to be more communicative, to be more empathetic, to be more aware of their employees' and staff's individual circumstances has become a real prerequisite and has been very, very different. So that focus on employee well-being and understanding that many people are working from small spaces at home, with children who need to be homeschooled, with partners who are also trying to work. These are not ideal situations. People are having to then manage, on top of that, anxiety over the general pandemic in general, and potential anxiety over other family members or over friends. So there's a huge pressure, which we've never seen before in the workplace. There's a huge pressure with all of these elements, creating a perfect storm, if you like, which has then inevitably impacted on mental health. Those people who have been isolated from home, so it's difficult enough working from home if you've got a young family. It's difficult working from home if you're on your own. So I think the need for ruthless kind of reprioritization of what really matters,
right,
what's important, has been a critical lesson.
And I mean, because I think it's very obvious to see that the massive kind of changes that are going on with organizations. I mean, actually, what's interesting, we were talking about this prior to the call about this book around the book I wrote called Punk CX, and actually a friend of mine sent me an email a month or so ago. He said it's amazing, and in the email he said, amazing to see how much Punk CX is going on. People bootstrapping their way through enormous changes in days rather than years. Now, what's interesting for me is because I've been watching kind of all of this, and people, and I've been talking for years about how organizations should try and be more responsive, more adaptive, more agile, and yet it seems to have taken a pandemic to generate some of the real and rapid change that we wanted to see, for some time. Now, I understand that was forced upon us, but I also kind of wonder how you think we can capture and harness the learnings from that, and also form those new habits, because it does also feel like there's almost like a belief that we're on a piece of elastic and we might actually snap back to something what we think is normal once things sort of stabilize. And I guess my question is like, we're learning some big lessons, we're facing some big challenges, but the lessons, how do we turn them from lessons into actually hardwired habits and new behaviors?
Yes, I think that's a very important question. And I think the thing that maybe we haven't done yet is actually to learn those lessons. So we've had to adapt to a new way of working, and we've all had to live in a very different way. But actually, have we actually stopped and thought about what are the positives from that and what are the negatives from that? i.e. what really are those lessons? And then, as you say, how do we turn those into sustainable behaviors for the future? I wonder whether we need to be, in fact, I believe that we do need to be doing more to actually extract the genuine lessons. What really has worked well? What's that sort of evidence-based approach? What are the things that we know is great? Increased flexibility, increased communication, empowering staff a little bit more to run their work day in the way they need to, and that sort of thing. But not everyone reacts well to that. Other people need direction, and for them it's been very difficult to not have other people around them to help them work. So I think we need to be mindful that everybody is reacting differently to this, and what is right in one environment may not necessarily be right in another. Really feel that we need to go back to what has worked well in your particular organization with your particular team under those particular circumstances. The other thing to remember is not everybody has been able to work from home.
Yes.
People, it's fine if you're sitting in front of a computer all day, you probably can do that from home. But, if you work on a construction site or in a shop, then you can't.
Yes.
So, how do we almost prevent that? It's not really two-tier, but it's a sort of assumption that everybody can work from home. And I think we have forgotten a bit of the reality for those people who can't. And then what is the appropriate way for them to be productive, for them to use their time? If they're furloughed from working in a cafe, for example, what do you do for 2 or 3 months?
Well, indeed, my sister works for a high street retailer that's in the high street fashion retailer, and she works in the production arm of the business. She's in pattern technology, and she's been furloughed for the last few months. She's only just heard that she's supposed to be going back in a couple of weeks or something, so beginning of August, and so she's been twiddling her thumbs for doing some volunteering and bits and pieces, but actually she's found it really quite hard. And I think the thing, though, that I want to come back to the lessons part and the learning the lessons, and I think that's a good point. However, I just was reflecting on the idea about how we do learn lessons, and most of those lessons learned within organizations, or more widely, if you like, in government or local authorities or not-for-profits and things. The lessons learned activity tends to be a retrospective, and it tends to happen at the end of something. And now my question is like, if we do it at the end of something, are we going to lose the momentum in many ways, particularly now, given that this is just so very, very different? And will we almost snap back to something and then start trying to learn the lessons, and then it'll be almost too late, if you know what I mean?
Yes, no, I do. I think you're right. People have short memories, so we need to make it easy for them. And as soon as people are back into a familiar environment, i.e. starting to actually go back into a workplace or back into normal life, if you like, and whatever normal is, then it's all too easy to fall back into that familiar. So I believe what we need to do, and to learn lessons from the world of agile, if you like, and again, talking from a sort of digital point of view, we need to be constantly reassessing and adapting and looking at how we are doing and constantly evaluating whether what we are doing is working, is the right thing for the business, is the right thing for the people, is the right thing for our customers, is the right thing for citizens. We have to do that in the moment. We have to be able to pivot and change direction quickly. So to me, this is very much about being able to adapt, to learn, to listen, to not to assume that processes have to be set in stone and things have to be always done in a certain way.
Yes.
I think the real opportunity from the past few months to me is this ability to break out of molds, to actually start doing things that work on a much smaller level. What works in one, as I said before, what works for one organisation or one team or one set of people is not necessarily going to be the right thing for others. Actually, if we keep sight of the objective is to meet the needs of the business, to meet the needs of the customer, to meet the needs of the employee, as long as we know that that's where we're all going, exactly how we get there will depend very much on the needs of the individuals involved.
Yes.
So we need to be more responsive to that. And I think that's it. It's about adapting and being responsive to the reality rather than feeling that things have to be done by the book.
Yes. And do you think, have you seen any examples of organizations that are actually taking that more of an agile approach to lessons learned, that it becomes an iterative and emergent lessons learned? Because that feels like something that we need to do. I mean, it's almost a bit like, I also kind of think about whether leadership in organizations, regardless of the side, have got the bandwidth kind of to take that on right now, and maybe doing it in more of an agile, iterative, incremental, emergent sort of way might be an easier way to get it. But I'm not sure there's very many people that have really started on that right now.
I think that's right, and I think it's very easy to say this is the way to do things, but it's very difficult to break down. Sort of old behaviours and familiar patterns of working. And I think, again, when people are in a crisis situation or are feeling that the risks are high, people tend to retreat to a default way of behaving. But I do think this is the big positive, and this is the big sort of almost the leap of faith that we need to take now. But the way we are going to get through this, because after all, this situation is not suddenly going to disappear and go away.
No.
COVID-19 is here to stay.
Yes.
We may or may not get a vaccine. We may or may not get a pandemic of something else. We may, what is the next crisis that's going to hit us? What is
the only guarantee is there will be another crisis.
Absolutely.
Whether it's health or social or environmental or terror-related or whatever it might be, whatever nature, there will be another one.
Exactly. So how do we start increasing our resilience and preparing ourselves for that to be the norm, the next crisis to come along? So, it's like we're talking about a second wave of COVID-19, and we're all having the same conversations about, will healthcare settings have enough PPE? I mean, we've had that conversation, but those lessons aren't being learned, potentially, or we wouldn't be still talking about it. So again, it's this sort of, the reality, the constant is the unknown, uncertainty, change, adaptation. And actually that's exciting, that's positive, that's creative. Getting a slightly different mindset, it's building that resilience and creating a slightly different mindset that actually embraces that. Now, when you're running a business, of course, you want to be able to demonstrate full control and have a clear plan and all the rest of it, of course. But in terms of how one manages risks in an organization, I think this is something that people have to get a lot better at. This idea of adapting to the unknown has to become much more core to the way organizations function, to the way boards function, to the way executive teams function, to leadership capabilities that are promoted.
I mean, and so let me turn the lens on leadership, and just sort of focus in a little bit, because I think that we all know it's been very challenging for leaders. You mentioned it's like, decision making in extreme uncertainty has been incredible. But also the other thing that's really stood out for me as well, and it's been pointed out by others, is how many leaders who are women have excelled through this period. And there's, to name but a few, there's Jacinda Ardern, Angela Merkel, Nicola Sturgeon, Tsai Ing-wen, Erna Solberg, Sanna Marin, Matron Jakobsdottir, Mette Fredriksson, Keiki Shalaja. I mean, to name but a few. I mean, so why do you think that is? I mean, these are all also kind of political leaders that are, so they're all political leaders, women political leaders. But I guess, why do you think that those female political leaders have been so successful? And also, have you seen some of that behavior kind of mirrored in the kind of commercial, governmental, or not-for-profit arenas?
Going back to your first point about why, I mean, I do think that what a lot of these female leaders have in common is a massive dose of empathy.
Right.
I think there's a massive dose of empathy and a massive dose of common sense.
Right.
Some very honest and transparent communication. And I think all of those things have added to a sense of trust and a sense of confidence that perhaps haven't managed to achieve. I think it's important to...
Can I add humble to that? Because I think there's an overarching kind of humbleness in their approach as well. Like a humbleness and a selflessness in many ways, and how they go about things.
Absolutely. And they put their people first. There's a sense that they want to look after their people. And it isn't a political... It's not political, it's social, it's human. So there's that humanity that comes through, which is not incompatible with strong leadership. And people think it is, and it isn't. And demonstrating your own vulnerability, because we're all in this together, we're all facing this, we're all uncertain, is essential. So I think these so-called soft skills actually really come into their own, paradoxically, if you like, in a crisis, because managing change is about working for the collective good.
Yes.
Demonstrating the humanity and that we're all in this together, but giving clarity of message and clarity of direction. But also, as you say, being humble enough to say we don't have, but this is what we think is the right thing to do for all of these reasons.
Yes.
Transparency, honesty, true communication, humanity, all inspires trust and confidence. And in a crisis, that's what a government needs from its people.
Yes. So, but Rachel, so I guess my question is going to be is that, so all of those leaders in the political realm, they're all the ones I named, where they're all kind of female. And I guess my question is going to be, have you seen that, if you like, mirrored across other domains, like the commercial domain or non-governmental kind of domain? And I guess also, is this about what's the common denominator? I mean, is it just that they're female, or is it about their kind of traits? I guess because that's what the pattern, because it's easy to jump to it's all about, it's female leaders, and that could be the absolute clue. But actually, what can everybody else, like say me, for example, being a bloke, what can I learn, say as a leader from these inspiring female leaders?
To me, it's really about what are the traits that are common to those female leaders that make them particularly effective in leading through crisis. And as we've said, this is very much about being honest in communication, about being transparent, about being empathetic, about listening, about really understanding. And those are traits that anybody can adopt. You don't have to be female to demonstrate those traits. But I think it is that those are the things that work when people are feeling very uncertain. In a crisis, people want clarity and direction, but they want that in a human way.
Yes.
They don't want that in a command and control and potentially dismissive way. I think taking people with you is really critical. And that can be at any level of leadership. any
Yes.
level of seniority, any rank. It's not about being the CEO of an organization or the prime minister of a country. It's absolutely about just having that humanity and clarity of focus to inspire the confidence and trust that's required if you're going to lead people successfully through something as scary as a pandemic.
Absolutely. I mean, and massive lessons for us all in that come from, you know, the inspiring examples that I listed out kind of before. But I guess also this other thing I wanted to say was, like, you know, we've done this, you know, this big move to remote for many of us. Some of it has been, many people have not been able to move to remote. Some people have been furloughed, but there's also going to there'll be this move back again to either back to work, back on site, or back to maybe a remote or a hybrid operating kind of model. So I think things will kind of change and will continue to change and evolve. And the thing that strikes me is that you talked about this before, you talked about remote leadership. And something that I've been thinking about is, you know, we talk about customer experience, we talk about the employee experience, we're starting to talk more broadly about stakeholder experience around, you know, a company's impact on broader society and you know, and its community. But I think there seems to be this emerging kind of thing, because the almost the paradigm has changed, is that we probably need to start talking more about the leadership experience. And because there's going to be, you know, we all want people to support the people that are doing the work and help them succeed. But I guess my question is, given the complete massive changes in circumstances and all the pressures and challenges, is who's supporting the people that's supporting the people, if you know what I mean? And how are we supporting them?
That's an excellent question again. And I think, you know, it's lonely at the top. I think you hear people say that those at the top of the tree have nobody in their organization they can speak openly and honestly with about how it feels and how they're doing. So there's something again about how do you improve and increase your personal resilience to be able to be the leader that your people need you to be. Mm-hmm. Very much about, you know, if you are going to role model those behaviors that are going to inspire the trust and allow the people who work for you to do their very best in a time of crisis, then you need to be very in touch with the impact that's having on you.
Yes.
And that's finding a peer somewhere, or a peer group to talk to share these experiences. Because I think that's the other thing to bear in mind, that when we're all working from home, it's very easy to think only we are experiencing what we're experiencing.
Oh, yes.
Everybody is experiencing this. But because we are physically isolated from others, it's much more difficult to say, God, you know, this is really tough, isn't it?
Yes.
Or a really bad day. You don't have those water cooler moments or whatever, where you can roll out your eyes at each other and so on.
Yes.
So I think leaders need to be more proactive, probably, in reaching out to their networks, to their peer groups, to their support groups, because that actually is essential for them to do their job properly. It's not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of not doing the day job. It's actually essential for the day job, for them to do it successfully.
But I think it's also kind of like, it's not, so I know that I've heard anecdotally from a friend of mine whose wife runs like a business association for design-led businesses. Mm-hmm. And they have recently, they put out almost like a support email to a bunch of leaders of these design-led businesses, and they convened a bit of a virtual get-together, have a conversation, etc., and like, how you doing? You're not alone, all this sort of stuff. And apparently the feedback that they got was incredible and incredibly personal in many ways, in many instances rather. In that, to your point, is that many leaders feel quite lonely, and people make assumptions that they're paid to do okay and be okay, as it were, but they're still human beings.
Absolutely.
And so we're seeing anecdotally some of the stuff that's sort of emerging, because people are starting to appreciate that actually there's something that we need to have almost like a wraparound with the leaders to help them think about that. And but that comes from thinking about the experience of leadership. But it also strikes me that we almost need to do that at all levels of the organization, because leadership's not just about the C-suite or the exec level. It's at all different levels where people are either managing kind of teams or taking decisions. And it feels to me that this almost like this pandemic has exposed this massive move to a new operating environment, has almost exposed a big kind of like gap of things that we need to think about, because we make big assumptions around capability in order to do these things. And it's this massive and extreme change that's actually shown up the fragility of the assumptions that we've made about people's capability to manage it. They're managing such a changing environment.
That's right. Something occurred to me when you were talking, which is also about the changing expectations of those coming into the workplace. The new entrants to the workplace, younger people, the so-called Gen Z, now have very different attitudes to where they work, how they work, what they do, than perhaps we did when we came into the workforce. So now doing work with purpose, having meaning is far more important to new entrants to the workforce than being paid a huge amount of money.
Yes.
That used to be the epitome of job satisfaction, and it isn't anymore. So this is, again, a challenge for leaders. So how do you start to say, okay, I've now got some very, very committed and very talented young people coming into my organization, but they don't want to work in the way that I've been used to leading my team. They want to work in a completely different way. So do I, as a leader, manage that alongside other people's preferences? So there's a whole thing about how do you manage teams' preferences in order to get the best out of everybody, without losing a sense of one team working together, and without diluting the objectives or the outcomes that the team produces. This is a very challenging landscape for leaders, and it's something that I think needs to be discussed much, much more.
So, Rachel, that's all kind of super interesting and fascinating, and also kind of extremely challenging and complicated at the same time. But don't despair, listeners. I'm going to ask Rachel a question that's going to help you get started on this kind of journey, because, as you know, that many people kind of benefit from the idea of having things boiled down to, if you want to get started on a journey, do this or this kind of first to get yourself kind of going. And so what I wanted to ask you was, somebody says, I want to improve my leadership skills because they want to use them to help them deliver a better experience to both their customers and all their employees. I mean, what would be your best advice to them? What would be particularly given this expanded and changing and ever evolving environment that we find ourselves in, what would be the, one or two things that you would say to them, do this and do this to kind of set yourself on that new course?
I would say that perhaps the number one thing is to accept that you will not have all the answers.
Right.
You cannot know everything in this new environment. And it's coming to terms with the fact that we are living and working in a totally different world. We're living and working in a world where the technology is changing around us constantly, which means that the processes that we use, the tools that we use, the techniques that we use, the expectations around us are constantly changing. And that's customer expectations as much as employee expectations. So don't be afraid to say, I don't have all the answers. When I think once you've accepted that the world is changing and moving, you can be much more comfortable with that constant change and start to actually quite enjoy adapting, experimenting, trying different things. What works well? What doesn't work well? How do you motivate people? How do you get the best out of people? Who is the team that is available to you? What are their strengths? How do you harness those strengths? Mitigate the weaknesses so that actually you get more than the sum of the parts? How do you start to listen to individuals, to understand the needs? I mean, we talk certainly in government digital a lot about user needs. Absolutely. What are the needs of your employees? What are the needs of your customer? What are the needs of the business?
Sure.
And how do you put all of those three bits together to create something that is sustainable and delivers the outcomes that are expected?
Perfect. Thank you. That's good advice. Kind of embrace the uncertainty.
Absolutely. There's no other way.
No. So just let me switch in gears a little bit, because my focus is primarily on service and experience, and sort of exploring and trying to help people kind of navigate what's kind of going on. I mean, if I was to ask you to sort of look forward a little bit, I'd be really interested to get your sort of take on what do you think the future of service sort of looks like, and what are some of the big challenges ahead?
I think we've covered quite a lot of those things. I think the key thing is changing expectations.
Right.
And the expectation that things are going to be much more personalized, much more self-service, much more convenient, much more tailored and targeted.
Yeah.
And that brings with it a whole range of issues. I think one of the things that is also changing around us is what is a face-to-face experience versus what's an online experience, and particularly in this COVID world, perhaps. So adapting to those new realities, and planning ahead to, as we've talked about before, what's the next new crisis? Just being prepared for there to be another roadblock in the way, but not being completely derailed by that roadblock.
Sure.
But being able to go around it and get past it without too much damage being done. And I think to aid people in maintaining this pace, there is something also about having a mindset that is open, and a lifelong learning type mindset. I mean, we are going to be adopting new things, new tools, new ways of doing things. We all know that in 10 years' time, we probably don't, haven't even imagined the jobs that most people will be doing. All of these sort of slightly science fiction-y concepts about the future are the reality.
Yes.
So the thing that makes us very different in a digital world is that we have humanity. So what is the uniquely human elements, the uniquely human aptitudes that are always going to be required, even if you have a machine able to process information far quicker than a human can? How do you add empathy, critical thinking, judgment, and all of these very uniquely, and that human transparency and empathy to the ability of a machine to deliver repetitive tasks far more accurately than we can? How do you deliver? How do you work together with those realities to create a kind of an optimum team for the future that then delivers that level of tailored experience that customers want? Perfect.
So thank you for that. I mean, that's great advice. But just to finish off, if I may, we're going to finish with a bit of fun, really. Because as we were talking about before we kind of started this, and as I mentioned earlier on, is that I wrote this new book called Punk CX late last year, which is what I've been doing ever since then. Is when I've been doing these interviews, is asking kind of people to play almost like a word association game with me. And I may ask them two questions. So if I may, the first question I'd like to ask you is what one or two words would you think would describe a punk approach to experience?
I think it's a great question, and I love the concept of punk CX. It's fab. I guess the first word that springs to mind is nonconformist.
Right. Awesome. I love that. I will add that to my list. And then the second question is, what one brand or organization do you think epitomizes that sort of ethos when they approach the experience? I mean, who embraces that sort of non-conformist sort of attitude?
That's hard. I think a lot of people are starting to try to.
Yes.
I think there's a difference between having a truly punk CX non-conformist approach and just trying to be a little bit different. There's a difference there. So I would say I haven't actually seen anything that I would perhaps honour with the title of truly punk CX, and I would expect it to be the startup that genuinely gets how digital disruption can deliver huge change and opportunity in a positive sense.
Perfect. What a great answer. Thank you. Rachel, that's all I have for today. So I just wanted to say thank you for joining me on the podcast today and for rummaging around with some of this kind of like stuff that's been going on and reflecting on some your experience, sharing your insight and your experience, and sort of reflecting on some of the big leadership and organizational challenges that we're seeing and what we should be trying to learn from them, and also the process of learning, I guess, as well. So yeah, that's been great. And so thank you so much for sharing your time and your experience and your insight with us today. That's been awesome.
Well, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it, and thank you very much indeed for inviting me.
Well, that was cool. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I always do actually, because I always learn something new when I speak to some of these amazing kind of people. And it's always something new that I can incorporate into my writing, speaking, workshops, and other sort of advisory work that I do. Now, if you're interested in learning about any of that sort of stuff, then you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinscoe.com. One final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or Spotify or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do tune in again soon. All the very best. Cheers. Bye.